Good morning to all of you from around the world. We at Executive Intelligence Review would like to welcome you to our EIR Emergency International Online Forum, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites, Urgent Need for a Cultural Renaissance. Now, the hour-by-hour changes in the present world crisis can only be accurately comprehended from the standpoint of current history, not so-called current events. With the initiation by the United States and Israel of war on Iran this past weekend, many have recalled the disclosure by the American General Wesley Clark back in 2007 of the Anglo-American military objective adopted no later than the days immediately after the September 11, 2000 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon of, quote, taking out 7 countries in 5 years. General Clark, at that time in 2007, named Iraq, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Syria, and finally Iran as those targets. But there was another speech given also in 2007 in July by the founder of Executive Intelligence Review, the late economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche. And we want to play an excerpt from that speech from 18 years ago now.
The time has come to make some history, to make a turning point in history, because there is no alternative. We have a military force, naval and others, stationed off the Indian Ocean region, which, contrary to all nonsense from some idiots in the U.S. community, is a preparation for Cheney to unleash war against Iran in terms of a massive air attack. You don't move B-52s into that area. You don't move 4 task forces into that area. You don't do the other things that are being done unless you're prepared while Congress is away to launch war. The consequences of launching a war are unbelievable. It would be a different form of World War III. You could not put this back in the bottle. Too many things are unstable. First of all, this occurs at a time where the world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating. There's nothing mysterious about this. I've talked about it for some time. It's been in progress. It's not abating. What's listed as stock values and market values in the financial markets internationally is bunk. These are purely fictitious beliefs. There's no truth to it. The fakery is enormous. There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. It's finished now. The present financial system cannot continue to exist under any circumstances, under any presidency, under any leadership, or any leadership of nations. Only a fundamental and sudden change in the world monetary financial system will prevent a general, immediate, chain reaction type of collapse. At what speed, we don't know, but it will go on and it will be unstoppable. And the longer it goes on before coming to an end, the worse things will get. And there is no one in the present institutions of government who is competent to deal with this. The Congress, the Senate, the House of Representatives is not currently competent to deal with this.
Our present situation, therefore, emanates from that past intention. And our present circumstance, both in terms of the Congress of the United States and the financial circumstance as well, is exactly as was stated 18 years ago. Will war with Iran bring about the fall of the Epstein class and its war party? The title of panel 1 of today's conference asks the question, are we on the road to Armageddon? And our first speaker is the founder and chairwoman of the International Schiller Institute and editor-in-chief of Executive Intelligence Review, Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, world citizens from many countries, I welcome you. We are meeting here at what very likely is the gravest moment in world history so far. It is more than likely than not that World War III has already begun. With the unprovoked attack by the United States on the Republic of Iran, we have entered now a spiral of escalation, which could escalate within a short period of time to a global nuclear war. It is therefore most urgent that all citizens of goodwill are mobilizing to call on their governments and parliaments in every country of the planet to immediately cease all military actions and return to diplomacy. According to a report by Reuters, the Pentagon told the US Congress shortly before the attack that there was no sign that Iran was going to attack the United States. First, so it was unprovoked. With the attack on Iran and the assassination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and who has now been declared a martyr, the killing which was the equivalent of killing the highest leader of Christianity, the Pope, we have now entered a dynamic which could lead to an escalation which, if not stopped, will mean the end of civilization in a global nuclear war, followed by a nuclear winter in which all life on Earth will be eliminated. We therefore join the appeal by Pope Leo XIV, his call to the world, to all nations, to recall their moral responsibility to seek peace. The Pope said in his recent Sunday Angelus, quote, "Stability and peace are not achieved through mutual threats, nor through the use of weapons, which sow destruction, suffering, and death, but only through reasonable, sincere, and responsible dialogue." Faced with the possibility of a tragedy of immense proportions, I make the heartfelt appeal to all parties involved to assume the moral responsibility of halting the spiral of violence before it becomes an unbridgeable chasm, said the Pope. The US attack on Iran is a repetition of the US attack on Iraq in 2003, where it is now 100% documented by the testimony of active participants in the process that all relevant US responsibles knew ahead of time that neither did Saddam Hussein possess weapons of mass destruction, nor was there any threat from Iraq to other countries. It was a premeditated, willful act of mass murder. Likewise, the attack by Israel and the United States on Iran in June 2025 was based on lies that Iran supposedly would possess nuclear weapons within a few days, ignoring the fatwa by Supreme Religious Leader Khamenei that the aim to possess nuclear weapons was in contradiction to Islamic law and therefore would not be pursued. In its newest attack, the United States pretended again to be in negotiation with Iran in Geneva while preparing an attack which, according to sources, Trump had already decided many days ahead. According to various reports, including one from analyst John Helmer, Iran had agreed in negotiations to the nuclear enrichment conditions and probably also agreed to stop backing Hezbollah, the Iraqis, and the Houthis. Apparently, it was unacceptable for Iran to give up its missile program, which it obviously regarded as crucial for its self-defense. According to these sources, General Daniel Kane and Joint Chief of Staff warned President Trump that a conventional attack on Iran and the nuclear facilities and missile stocks would not be successful, and therefore advised a, quote, balancing act. Now, in the meantime, news have arrived that according to sources, the 2035 overmatch brief, a situation exercise from the Pentagon recently, has shown that Chinese hypersonic missiles could have sank the US aircraft carrier US General Ford. And according to other contacts, the Journal du Dimanche, the French magazine, said that the Chinese have sent to Iran the same CM-302 missiles. The question being, do the Chinese have the key to deploy them? Also, other sources say that the Iranians have been given the electronic jamming devices to prevent the takeoff of the US F-35 on the aircraft carrier. Now, it is also reported by many analysts who are extremely familiar with the military side of events that the US interceptor missiles can only last for about 1 to 2 weeks, while President Trump has announced this war will take now approximately 4 weeks, and that due to the massive delivery of weapons to Israel to flatten the Gaza and to Ukraine, that the American ammunition reserves have been reduced to maybe a very short period of time, 1 to 2 weeks, whatever. So therefore, the question is that in recent, it is also reported that apparently in recent meetings of Prime Minister Netanyahu with Trump in Miami, it was communicated that Israel regards the Iranian missiles as an existential threat to Israel and that they have no choice but to attack and use nuclear weapons, with American agreement or not. Naturally, Russia and China are acutely aware of this. If Israel uses nuclear weapons against Iran, will they, Russia and China, be able to sit back and see the destruction of one of their BRICS nations? Let's take a step back and review how we got to this point. I think we have to go back to 1991. After the end of the Cold War, the United States, and that is only 35 years ago, recognized, and everybody else, that there was a realistic possibility for a peace order for the 21st century. And many people, Hans Friedrich Genscher, Gorbachev, Jack Matlock, and many others have spoken about this. They recognized that there was the chance for a new peace order. People talked about the common European house, security order from Vladivostok to Lisbon. There was even talk about Russia joining NATO, because there was all of a sudden no more enemy. But that historic chance to build a lasting peace order for the 21st century was missed because the neocons in the United States and Great Britain decided to attempt to create an unipolar world based on the Anglo-American special relationship, using the British Empire as their model. With it came color revolutions, the extension of NATO 6 times to the east, contrary to promise not to move 1 inch to the east, regime change in many countries, and the infamous interventionist wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc. All of these attempts led to a dramatic blowback, whereby the countries of the global south, who now represent a global majority of 85% of the human species, decided that they would attempt to create and establish their right for economic development. This was essentially enabled through the rise of China and through efforts like the Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, trying to establish a new economic system. The recent security doctrines of the United States, such as the US National Security Strategy, the US security strategy, and other US doctrines, They leave no doubt that the United States, even in the second term of the Trump administration, intends to be the dominant force in the world and is obviously determined to dismantle these efforts to create a system of equal partnership for all. So the amazing thing is that the European coalition of the willing, Great Britain, France, and Germany, are now not attacking the US attack on Iran, an unprovoked act of aggression in total violation of international law, but that the Iran retaliation against US bases in different countries in the Middle East is what needs to be attacked. And they even say, you cannot always apply international law, when you're dealing with such situations. And in this way, they even put themselves in contradiction to the US Democrats, who are sharply condemning Trump's attack. Have these European three governments lost any moral compass by arguing that in this case, international law can be neglected? Let us be absolutely clear. We may already be in the middle of World War III, and therefore urgently have to reverse course and return to diplomacy. This is what we must do. I'm therefore asking the participants of this conference, that is you all, to launch an urgent appeal to all world governments, parliaments, the UN Security Council, and the UN General Assembly to remove to international law and diplomacy. This return to diplomacy must be done in the spirit of the Peace of Westphalia, which came together because the war parties realized that if they would continue the war, there would be nobody alive to enjoy the victory because they would all be dead. And is this not more true today in the age of thermonuclear weapons, where nobody would be alive if this present situation plays out? We are therefore confronted with a test of mankind. Do we have the moral fitness to survive? We must put on the table the urgent need for a new security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country on the planet. I have written 10 principles outlining what the substance of such a negotiation must be. It must urgently include an orderly reorganization of the totally bankrupt world financial system, as my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, warned about in the video clip you saw in the beginning. Let us therefore call forth the most beautiful image of man each of us has within us, and we ever have been thinking about, to act with courage and with love for mankind. Let us fully the appeal for the United States and all other countries to return to the table of diplomacy and act in a responsible way, because our very existence as a human species is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. And if you have just joined us, we welcome you to today's EIR Emergency International Online Forum, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites, Urgent Need for a Cultural Renaissance. And if you have just heard Helga Zepp-LaRouche, founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute and editor-in-chief of Executive Intelligence Review. Now, for our English speakers, please note that there will be persons speaking in other languages as the conference goes on, so you will have to go to the bottom of the screen, look for the globe there, and select interpretation. If you don't see a globe, you'll see 3 dots, press the dots, or you'll see something that says more, press on that, and you'll then can select English. Our next speaker is Professor Zhang Weiwei of China. He is Professor of International Relations and Director of the China Institute, Fudan University, Shanghai. Welcome. I think you're muted.
LaRouche. Hello, everyone. And today, really, the world is in crisis, in chaos, a lot of deeply intertwined turmoil and crises. The war against Iran launched by United States and Israel, the Gaza conflict, the Greenland crisis, the Epstein files, extensive social divisions across many societies, and more. And though these events may seem unrelated, to my mind, they are in fact deeply interconnected. They have challenged the bottom line of human conscience, the foundations of peace and justice, international law, and basic human rights, and our shared humanity. In my view, these crises are the inevitable outcome of several interrelated causes, such as the alienation of power from the people, both domestically and internationally. The practice of the rule of the jungle, or law of the jungle, and the logic of the might is right, and widespread moral depravity among many Western elites. I think they also expose some profound structural contradictions within the Western political system. And to overcome this predicament, if possible, and indeed, we have to urgently call for a cultural renaissance, one that Madame Helga LaRouche has advocated for many years. Consider the Greenland crisis. It's driven by hegemonic logic and narrow geopolitical self-interest. Consider the tragedy in Gaza. It lays bare blatant double standards with regard to human rights, etc. And it proved that the so-called rules-based order, international order, is merely a tool for the powerful, and the credibility of this order has collapsed. As for the Epstein files, they reveal the moral bankruptcy of many contemporary Western elites, where the law has become a protective shield for the privileged. The illegal war on Iran and the assassination of its supreme leader represent a blatant disregard for international law and the basic principle of national sovereignty. And many social divisions plaguing the United States and other countries also reflect systemic failure. Partisan confrontation has evolved into widespread identity conflicts, unprecedented inequality, and racial division and other social crises. Or they have fueled growing internal violence. In part, political elites deliberately divert public attention from domestic turmoil and tensions by stirring up external conflicts and even wars. All these events lead to one conclusion: the Western democratic model, as practiced in the United States, in many other countries, is trapped in a deep structural crisis, a crisis of institutional degeneration and governance failure, marked by poor leadership, governance incompetence, and moral collapse. It's high time we draw upon and share the wisdom from our diverse civilizations to reshape the foundational values of our society. More than 2,500 years ago, the Chinese philosopher Confucius compelled the rulers and the elites to a boat and the people to water. He observed that water can carry the boat and can also overturn the boat. In other words, when rulers and the elites become seriously divorced from the people, they will eventually be abandoned by the people or even overthrown by the people. And Chinese culture has long emphasized the moral character and personal integrity of political leaders as the most essential criteria for such leaders. The Confucian teaching is cultivate yourself, regulate your family, govern the state, and bring peace to the world. So self-cultivation and a harmonious family have long been regarded as fundamental requirements for legitimate leadership in China's long history and for legitimate leaders in China's long history. Broadly speaking, moral cultivation, together with the ability to uphold justice and distinguish right from wrong, is a precondition for a good leader and good leadership. I believe other civilizations hold similar values on morality and integrity for their leaders. So I think we must pull the finest wisdom from all different civilizations to lay the foundation for a global cultural renaissance for the advancement of our shared humanity. We draw upon the strength of different civilizations, promote cultural exchanges and mutual learning, and use the power of culture to end prolonged alienation of power from its people, to end the supremacy of the power of capital, to eradicate moral depravity and cultural decline, and to reject the law of the jungle and the belief that might is right. We must firmly uphold the international legal system centered on the UN Charter. So let a global cultural renaissance light the way forward for one humanity, for our humanity. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you also. That was Professor Zhang Weiwei of China, Professor of International Relations and Director of the China Institute of Fudan University, Shanghai. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency Zoom conference, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites. Our next speaker is Beatriz Bissio of Brazil, an associate professor of the postgraduate program of Comparative History, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored with the invitation to participate in this important meeting. I will speak in my mother language, Spanish, and I hope you all will understand through the translators. Well, after those important speeches, what I prepared, I think it's something I feel very deeply, and I hope you will share my ideas. Nos faltan palabras y metáforas para describir los
words
momentos
and
que
metaphors
estamos viviendo.
to describe the times we are
En
living
un
in.
momento de la historia en que
At
la
a time in
humanidad
history when
desarrolló
humanity
tecnologías,
has developed
conocimientos que
technologies,
permitían
knowledge
solucionar buena parte de los
that
desafíos que
could solve many of the
enfrentamos,
challenges that we
sea
face,
en el terreno del cambio climático,
whether that
de
be
la
in the areas
salud,
of
la
climate
superación
change,
del hambre,
health,
la supresión
overcoming
de la
hunger,
brecha social
or
y
closing the social
económica
and
que
economic
divide al
gap that
mundo.
divides the world.
En este momento, una
At this
mínima
time,
parcela de los
it is
seres
just a tiny
humanos,
fraction of human
el
beings,
1%,
less than 1%,
está sometiendo al
are
resto, al
subjecting the rest,
99%,
99%,
a la posibilidad
are
del
subjecting
desastre
them to the
nuclear.
possibility of nuclear
¿Por qué?
disaster. Why?
Porque ellos saben que el
Because they
sistema que
know
los
that the
sustenta,
system that
el
sustains them,
capitalismo en su etapa más
capitalism
cruel,
in its cruelest
no podría
stages,
sobrevivir sin el
cannot
poder
survive without
destructivo de las
the
armas
destructive power of
y
weapons,
claro del dinero, como muy bien ya
and
fue explicado
of
también.
course money as well, as was well
La agresión de
explained
Estados
already.
Unidos y de Israel a Irán
The aggression of the United
se ha
States and
transformado
Israel
ya en un
against
conflicto
Iran
regional.
has already turned into a
Todas
regional
las
conflict.
justificativas utilizadas
All the
por el
justifications
presidente
used by
Trump,
President Trump,
cada vez más errático,
who is becoming increasingly
En realidad
erratic.
son mentiras.
In fact, these are all
Irán
lies.
no representa
Iran
una amenaza
does
para
not
los
pose a
Estados
threat
Unidos.
to the United States.
En realidad, lo que
In
sucede
fact, what is
es
happening
que Irán
is
ha
that
insistido, y esto lo ha
Iran
dicho muy
has
bien
insisted,
nuestra querida Helga
and
LaRouche,
this was stated very clearly
Irán ha
by our
insistido
dear
en
Helga
que no
LaRouche.
tiene en sus
Iran has
proyectos
insisted
la
that
bomba
it
nuclear,
does not
inclusive por motivos
have
religiosos.
as a plan
Y
to
además
develop
estaba
nuclear weapons
negociando,
for religious
honestamente estaba
reasons, among
negociando
others. And it
dentro de
was
todo lo que era
negotiating,
posible
honestly
a partir de
negotiating,
una posición
as much as
soberana,
that was possible
estaba
within a
negociando
policy of sovereignty. It was
en la mesa de
negotiating
negociaciones como debe ser cuando hay
at the
diferencias
negotiating table, as should be
con
the
los
case when
Estados
there are
Unidos,
differences.
con la mediación
They
de
were
Omán.
negotiating with the
Pero
United
Estados
States
Unidos
through
e
the
Israel,
mediation of
una
Oman.
vez más,
The United
ya
States
lo
and
han
Israel,
hecho,
once again,
una
because
vez
they have
más,
done this before,
usa el diálogo
they
diplomático como una
used
cortina de humo
diplomatic
para
dialogue
en
as a
verdad
smokescreen
esconder los verdaderos objetivos que
to
era
hide their
el
true
ataque
objectives,
militar a Irán con
which
el
was a military
objetivo
attack on
del
Iran with
cambio
the
de
aim
régimen,
of achieving
regime
a
change.
regime change.
Alimentaban en realidad la falsa esperanza
They
de
were
que al
encouraging the false
decapitar
hope
al líder máximo, al
that
asesinar,
by
al martirizar
decapitating
a Ali
the supreme
Khamenei,
leader, by turning
el
Ali
pueblo
Khamenei into a
saliera a las
martyr,
calles
that the people of
reclamando
Iran
el
would
fin del régimen.
go to the streets to seize the opportunity and overthrow the
Qué
regime.
desconocimiento de la realidad.
What a misunderstanding of
Qué
reality.
poco estudio, qué poco análisis
What
y qué mala
poor
fe,
analysis
evidentemente, ¿no?
and what bad
Solo
faith,
una
clearly.
profunda ignorancia
Only
de lo que
a profound
significa
ignorance
la fe
of what
islámica,
the
de lo que
Islamic faith
implica
means,
la fe islámica,
of what is implied by this faith,
y al haberse creído
and
también todas las mentiras que
also
ellos repiten y que la
believing the
prensa
lies which they
internacional
themselves
sumisa
spread
le da
and which the Western press
repercusión, ¿verdad?
spread,
Solo
which
esa
they end up
profunda
believing.
ignorancia podría en realidad
Only such
sostener
a
esa idea de que
deep
la
ignorance
decapitación,
could
la
lead
muerte,
to
el
the idea
martirio
that
de Ali Khamenei
decapitation and
abriría
the
las
killing
puertas
of
para
Ali
un
Khamenei would
reclamo del
open the
pueblo
doors
al
to
cambio de
the
régimen.
clamor of the population for regime change.
Pero ¿qué pasa? Que
So what is
ese,
going on?
digamos, error, por llamarlo de
Let's
alguna forma,
say that this so-called mistake
está llevando a una guerra regional.
is leading into a regional war.
La muerte del martirio del dirigente
The
máximo, de su
martyrdom, the
familia y
death
otros
of their
importantes
supreme leader, his
dirigentes
family, and other
del
leaders
régimen, del gobierno,
of the
de la
Iranian
administración de
government
Irán,
of
lo
Iran,
que están haciendo es
their assassination, what this has done
llevar a,
is that this
además
is
de los
leading
millares de muertos,
to,
inclusive ya de
besides the
muertos
thousands of
de
deaths,
soldados
including the deaths of
americanos
American
en las
soldiers
bases de la región que
on
tiene
military
Estados Unidos y
bases
que han sido
across the region which the
como
United States
respuesta
has,
agredidas por
and
Irán.
have been attacked in
Además de
response
todas
by
esas
Iran.
víctimas, en
Besides
realidad
all of those
estamos ya
victims, we are in
ante
fact
la
already
dramática
facing
internacionalización del
the
conflicto,
dramatic
una
internationalization of the
escalada militar de
conflict and a
consecuencias
military
imprevisibles,
escalation of
como ya lo ha dejado muy claro
unforeseeable
en su discurso inicial
results,
nuestra
as has been
anfitriona Helga
stated very
LaRouche.
clearly by our hostess
Pero
Helga
además
Zepp-LaRouche.
de servir a la ambición de
But
Israel
in
de
addition to
acabar
serving
con un
Israel's
régimen que
ambition to
considera su
destroy
principal
its
adversario en la
strongest
región,
adversary in the region,
la verdad es que
the
la
truth of the matter
agresión a
is that
Irán
the
también
aggression
ha
against
sido,
Iran,
y lo tenemos que entender así, una
and we have
agresión
to
a los
understand this,
BRICS,
this has been an aggression
porque
against the
conocemos
BRICS
muy bien la
nations.
importancia de Irán
We know the importance of
en los
Iran
BRICS,
in the
y en
BRICS,
particular, sin
and
duda,
in
la
particular,
importancia de Irán
without doubt,
para
the
China
importance
y
of
para
Iran
Rusia.
for China and
No
for
voy a entrar
Russia.
en detalles
I won't go
las
into the
varias
details of this, of the
justificativas
different
que hay para esta afirmación.
justifications or reasons
Nomás
for making
podemos
such a
recordar
statement,
el hecho de que
but to just mention one aspect of this, it is estimated that between 20 to 25% of the oil consumed daily by China comes from Iran, regardless of the sanctions and so on. They have found a way for that oil to reach China and other countries as well, other consumer nations. Therefore, here from Brazil, Brazil is also a member of the BRICS. Brazil, which is the most important country of Latin America, if you view it from the standpoint of demographics, from its territorial expanse, its wealth, its position within the BRICS. Observing this situation from Brazil, we clearly have to view this as a problem which is not far away. It's here as well. The consequences of this aggression against Iran are also here in Latin America directly. They involve us directly. We already had, in the first days of the year, we witnessed the aggression against Venezuela, the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife, the bombing of Venezuela. This was the first warning of what could be coming. And now, in fact, Brazil observes this aggression against Iran with extreme concern. That's what has been stated most clearly by the Brazilian government, by President Lula, through the foreign ministry, and other members of the government. In other words, the current version of the Monroe Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine, as Trump aspires to call it, and which, of course, finds echoes here within our area. A lot of the press in Brazil has aligned itself with the doctrine coming from the United States, unfortunately. They do so, unfortunately, very uncritically. There is an alignment of most of the press and also of the extreme right with these positions. And we here in Brazil in 2026, we are in an electoral year. This will be a decisive election, general election, which covers the presidency, all of the governors, the state legislative assemblies, the parliament. In fact, this is going to be a very decisive moment, not only for Brazil, but for the entire region, given the weight that Brazil has in the whole region, especially in Latin America. So, therefore, as we look at this situation, personally, I believe that what is called for is to convene, to call for all of the peoples. They are the ones who suffer these aggressions. They are the ones facing aggression, to call for unity, as has been well analyzed previously in these platforms which the Schiller Institute and the IR have provided us. We need unity of the people to demand a return to diplomacy, that diplomacy prevail over conflict, that the survival of humanity again be made a priority, and that we join and ally in defense of the most important values of humanity, which have created in human civilization to create a future which is not being permitted by those who are promoting and pushing the world towards a third world war, a nuclear world war. Therefore, to avoid this possible destruction, which is so close and so dangerous, the people of the world must unite. We must make our voices heard. We must go out into the streets. We have to go in the workplaces. We must organize. We have to be at the universities discussing these matters with the youth, with new generations, discussing the challenges we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have just heard Professor Beatriz Bissio of Brazil, She is an associate professor at the postgraduate program of comparative history, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And again, we want to welcome everybody if you have just tuned in to our emergency forum, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites, Urgent Call for Need for a New Renaissance. Our next speaker from India, Professor B.R. Deepak, professor and former director of the Center of Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies of Nehru University of New Delhi. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be one of the participants in this August gathering. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, we meet today at a moment of deep uncertainty in world affairs. The international environment is marked by rising tensions, geopolitical rivalries, and the erosion of trust between nations. From the Russia-Ukraine war to crises in regions such as Latin America, even in Indo-Pacific, and now the US-Israel-Iran war, the global order appears increasingly fragile. The expiration of major arms control arrangements like the New START Treaty raises concern about strategic stability. At the same time, political scandals, economic protectionism, and ideological polarization have contributed to a broader sense of moral and institutional decline in global governance. In such a turbulent international context, I believe the joint declaration issued by Schiller Institute on January 12th, calling for the re-establishment of international law and the creation of a new global security and development architecture becomes particularly significant. Since many of the panelists have been talking about cultural dialogue, cultural renaissance, I think I wish to focus on one particularly meaningful example of such a dialogue, the dialogue of civilizations between India and China in the last 2 millennia. Unlike the pessimistic vision proposed by Samuel P. Huntington in his well-known thesis of the clash of the civilizations, history shows that civilizations do not inevitably collide. Instead, they often interact through dialogue, exchange, and mutual learning. One of the most remarkable features of this interconnectedness between India and China was what scholars in China and India describe as circulatory movement of ideas, people, technologies, and commodities across region. The most profound example of this exchange was the transmission of Buddhism from India to China. Beginning around the 1st century CE, as Buddhist ideas moved across cultures, they absorbed and interacted with local philosophical traditions, particularly Confucianism and Taoism. The result was the emergence of uniquely Chinese form of Buddhism, characterized by new interpretations, artistic expressions, and even newly compiled sutras. In this way, Buddhist philosophy became both a bridge and a catalyst for intellectual synthesis between two civilizations. Alongside religion, many other elements of knowledge also traveled through these networks. Ancient Indian and Central Asian contributions in astronomy, literature, music, and linguistic fields entered China and enriched regional knowledge systems. So these intellectual exchanges expanded the horizon of both civilizations and helped shape the development of Asian scholarship for centuries. Equally important were the people who facilitated this dialogue. It was primarily people-centric dialogue. Thousands of scholars, monks, translators, and travelers, they journeyed between India, Central Asia, and China, the dedication created one of the most remarkable translation enterprises in human history. In fact, if we say that the entire repository of Buddhist literature in East Asia was created by these people, it won't be wrong. In fact, many ancient Indian Buddhist texts that were lost in India or the land of origin survive today only in Chinese and Tibetan translations. And various scholar monks, they were instrumental in this interconnectedness or the bridge building. For example, Faxian, Parmarth, Kumarajib, Xuanzang, and I Ching. These individuals traveled across deserts, mountains, and dangerous routes in search of knowledge. The journeys were not merely religious pilgrimages, they were acts of cultural diplomacy. They collected manuscripts, studied languages, documented societies, and translated texts that would shape intellectual life across Asia. In fact, Xuanzang's celebrated work, Great Tang Records of the Western Region, it provides invaluable information about geography, society, and religious institutions of ancient India. And some of the archaeological discoveries in India, so they have been based on what Xuanzang wrote during 7th century AD. There were civilizational exchanges between India and China. So they are the manifestation of this interconnectedness. And it was not limited only to ideas and religion. It also involved technologies, and economic interaction. Trade routes carried commodities and practical knowledge between the two regions. A fascinating example is this of this development is the sugar making technology traveling first from India to China, and then, of course, coming back in a circulatory movement to India in the form of granulated white sugar. Other technologies and commodities followed similar paths. China introduced innovations such as paper, silk, porcelain, tea to broader Asian markets and then world at large. The openness that characterized these exchanges was also evident during the height of Tang Dynasty in China. Tang period was remarkably cosmopolitan in character. Archaeological discoveries in places such as Quanzhou, Tali, Lopnur further testify to the multicultural networks that flourished across the region. Perhaps one of the most vivid artistic reflections of these exchanges can be seen at the Mokao Caves in Dunhuang. So these cave temples, located along the Silk Road networks, contain murals and sculptures depicting diverse people, religion, and artistic styles. They stand as enduring monuments to centuries of cultural interaction and diplomacy. It is important to recognize that cultural exchange has never been limited to Asia alone. Western civilizations have also made profound contribution to global development through advances in science, philosophy, technology, and the arts. As one of the most celebrated Indologists in China, Professor Qi Xiaolin, he has emphasized interaction between culture is always complex. Exchange can produce confluence, assimilation, resistance, and transformation. Yet, it is precisely through this dynamic process that civilizations evolve and flourish. Professor Qi Xiaolin, he has also talked about the benefits or the advantages of this cultural diplomacy. In fact, he flags out three. The first, for more than 2,000 years, India and China have learned from each other and enriched each other's cultures. Second, the cultural heritage of humanity is not the product of any single nation. It is the collective creation of all people. Recognizing this fact can strengthen mutual understanding and friendship. Third, the civilizations of China and India belong to broader Oriental culture sphere, whose influence may play an increasingly significant role in the future of global civilization. In conclusion, the history of interaction between India and China offers an important lesson for our own time. Civilizations do not prosper through isolation, exclusivism, or protectionism. They grow through dialogue, exchange, and mutual learning. At a time when geopolitical tensions threaten international stability, the example of past civilizational dialogue reminds us that cooperation across cultures is not only possible, it is essential. If we draw inspiration from these historical experiences, we may yet build a global order based on respect, inclusiveness, and shared human values. Such a vision is not merely an ideal of the past, it is a practical guide for the future of humanities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Deepak. That was Professor Deepak from former director of Center of Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies of Nehru University, New Delhi. We have a special guest not on your program. This is Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Mr. Kucinich was a congressman from 1997 to 2013. He has explicitly spoken out against war since he entered Congress in 1997, notably opposing the Iraq War under George Bush, the 1999 NATO bombing of Yugoslavia under Bill Clinton, the actions in Libya by Barack Obama, and the present war as well. His latest piece is titled Iran, Epstein, and Human Sacrifice. Welcome very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to say, having listened to Professor Deepak's presentation, how measured and erudite it was, and what a pleasure it was to have the opportunity to listen to him and also to participate, unfortunately, if only briefly, in this important meeting. As you know, I've posted, some of you know, I've posted on Substack a column that I regularly write concerning the United States and Israel's attack on Iran, and in particular, the strike. There's two things. One is the murder of the Ayatollah, and the second is the attack on the little girls' elementary school. The death toll now there exceeds 150, mostly children. This is a war of choice, and it's a war of choice that the United States and Israel, unfortunately, have conspired to execute upon the people of Iraq. There are many reasons that are now being given, all of them false. The underlying concern that I have is that this is a further expression of a longstanding colonial mindset, and one that is now tethered to a type of megalomania that's obsessing some of our leaders in the United States. The United States Congress must go forward, not just with the War Powers Resolution, but this is certainly a cause for impeachment. Now, in some ways it would be symbolic because while the votes may narrowly be there in the House, the Senate does not possess the votes to remove the president. But there's only two measures that Congress has to take any action. One is impeachment, and the other one is to cut off funds for this enterprise in Iran. Unfortunately, the commitment that President Trump made to Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be very deeply entrenched in longstanding relationships the president has with supporters of Israel, as well as the fact, unfortunately, that groups that support Israel have a very strong hand in the United States Congress. However, one thing they cannot control is the American people willing to go to the streets to protest this carnage that has put not only the lives of innocent Iranians at risk, but has put the lives of people throughout the region at risk, as well as the men and women who serve in the armed forces of the United States who are in the region, and also who might be called upon in some way to participate in this act of aggression. So Congress has to, debate has to go back to Congress. And while I'm not particularly optimistic about what this particular Congress can do, it is urgent that Congress take up this matter because it's a constitutional issue. It is a clear abuse of Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, which requires that Congress approve all such military actions, in particular declarations of war or practices of war. The president has repeatedly violated that, but now we're at a crisis point where he's precipitating what could be World War III. We must not gild this issue. When war begins, the fact is there is no control. War is generally the lack of control. Things spin out of control, and there is no, and that's already happening. And so we need to, in the United States here, we need to insist that Congress take action, but the American people who have already seen the abuse of power by this administration, who have seen it in the streets of our city through the Immigration and Customs Enforcement operation, which functions as a private army, the people of the United States will have to move forward and demand that they take back their government. This will have impact on the midterms. But in some ways, that's a small matter right now because we're talking about something that's months away, and actually before the new Congress takes place, it's many months away. So so Congress still has to speak. The American people have to act. And finally, to our friends across the world, it's important to know that not everybody in the United States supports this wanton and reckless warring upon another nation. It's important to remember that there are those of us in the United States who understand the implications of international law that are being broken now and broken repeatedly. And it's important to understand that we do not indulge in this ceremony, the destruction of innocence all over the world. We have an obligation as Americans to stand up for our people, for sure, but also to stand up for people around the world who are interested in peace. The United States was not threatened here, and President Trump was not threatened. This is a clear violation of international law, and as someone who has led the effort against many of the wars in the last 30 years, I can tell you that this is a time for straight talk, for careful analysis, and for us to link arms around the country and around the world in the cause of peace and social and economic justice. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to participate. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to stay on this call, but I felt an obligation to share with you some thoughts from the standpoint of a former member of the United States Congress for 16 years, a two-time Democratic presidential candidate, and somebody who sees himself not just as a citizen of America, but as a citizen of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And for all the who just got on, that was former Congressman Dennis Kucinich who spoke to us. And I'm sure that the international audience appreciates that unannounced, but nonetheless, I think very welcome statement. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency forum. Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites, Urgent Need for a Cultural Renaissance. Our next speaker is Professor Yifan from China, the Institute of Global Governance and Development, Renmin University, Beijing. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. So it's really a pleasure to take part into these very important conferences at the moment where the world has been on the verge of a collapse in the Middle East. This time we see the war is escalating because of this assault by Israel and the United States. And Trump administration thinks it's very smart to launch this assault to kill all these Iranian leaders. But it triggered a desperate war on on part of Iranian people, because most of the Iranian people think that it's a time of Armageddon. So they will fight back. In the last hours, Iranian armies have launched so many missiles, ballistic missiles, destroys American military bases in Middle East, in other Gulf countries, and also some aircraft on those bases have been destroyed, have been brought down, shot down by Iranian missiles. So the old signals think that Trump administration may easily launch a war, but he will have a lot of difficulty to end up this war, because the war will prolong to some extent, and visibly the United States or Israel are not prepared to maintain a long-term war in Middle East, even with Iranian people. So that's something very, very, very critical. They think that they were very smart, as well as in the case of Venezuela, they can take over the leader of another country by kidnapping him. While this time in Iranian's case, they think that they were very, very smart by killing all these leaders at once. But they will trigger a tremendous war in Middle East, and this war will drive in all these neighboring countries, all these American troops, and that I think that Donald Trump understands this. Since the last Iraqi war and Afghanistan war, he doesn't want to involve all American troops on the ground. So he thinks that he can smartly destroy enemy's leaders by launching this kind of assault. But strategically, it's a big mistake, because it cannot allow Americans to gain advantage in the strategic spheres. And then it will prolong Americans' economy into a long time crisis, because the US economy is on the verge of a crisis because of this so-called AI bubble. So the New York stock market was relying heavily on these AI companies. Well, there's a big risk. As the US government is forced to spend money on military actions, so money will shift from those stock market into the military sectors. So the lack of liquidity in the stock market will, to some extent, will poke the bubble. And then the bubble, once burst, will involve the US economy into a deep crisis, something like 2008 or even worse. So that's a serious situation. Well, we have to recognize that since several months, the Trump administration is committing a big mistake. First, threatening to take over Greenland, to take over even Canada, and then to trigger the anger everywhere among these Western allies. And nowadays, in Middle East, he has committed another fundamentally, strategically mistake. And this strategic mistake will lead the United States to a very, very dangerous path. If he continues, he will eventually lose the end of this war, so lose the face. And then if he continues, he will lose the midterm elections in November this year, because it will run out American energy for economic development. And then so Americans' electorate will be very, very angry about his decisions, especially those states who supported Trump administration, who supported Donald Trump's candidate, will be very, very disappointed by his public policies. Especially the tariffs have seriously affected a lot of states. Well, the electorate have voted for him, and then they were very disappointed because the tariffs have hurt small and medium-sized business people, because the global economies was so seriously connected that the tariffs don't only hurt American consumers, but also American producers, because a lot of American manufacturing producers rely on the global supply chain to maintain their products, to maintain their cost of competitiveness. While the tariffs had raised the cost for everything, so small and medium-sized business people cannot bear the cost of these tariffs. So many of them went bankrupt because of the tariffs. So a political decision made by Donald Trump seems to protect American people, end up by ruling many of the American peoples, but also a lot of American manufacturing businesses. That's how this year the consequences of these political decisions and economic decisions will be, the consequences will be reviewed more and more seriously, and people will understand that all these rhetorics has no fundamental basis to be implemented or to carry out all these positive results. So I will just say a few words about these. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Ding Yifan from China, professor of the Institute of Global Governance and Development of Renmin University, Beijing. And again, for those just coming on, this is our emergency forum, VIR, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites, Urgent Need for a Cultural Renaissance. Our next speaker is from India, Namit Verma, author and security analyst. Welcome.
Thank you, Dennis. And it was very educational listening to this diverse panel, and also to as you have positioned the subject today, Epstein and the bottomless depravity of the elite. It certainly has something to do with the state of affairs of the world today, but I will address this initial subject briefly and then go on more towards the state of the world today. The initial subject is important because it is representative of the decline of American governance. it also is connected with the withdrawal of the American government from the UN, from the ambit of many UN organizations. It is very strange that that the United States, which has a legal obligation to provide, let us say, some kind of protection against criminal interference to the United Nations. That is the basis of their hosting the UN at New York. And so when the charges against Mr. Epstein were primarily that he was interfering with diplomats visiting the General Assembly, this was not a subject to be, this aspect of the subject was initially ignored, and only the pedophilia issue came up. And that was dealt at the level of a Florida court, wherein deal making was took place, and the interference with the United Nations votes, something which Sergei Lavrov has recently exposed at great length, of how non-American visitors are targeted and blackmailed through these operations. Now, that aspect was ignored in the initial arraignment, and his 18-month judicial sentence was also effectively reduced to 13, and he got out. Thereafter, a very interesting thing happened in the United Nations. The UN had 3 platforms to deal with gender issues. All 3, all of a sudden, were merged in following Mr. Epstein's release in 2009. And at that point of time, if you recall, it was the Epstein scandal was primarily, or not primarily, but the big names involved at that point of time in 2009 were Prince Andrew and some others. And these nations, the nations that they represented from the old order, they came together to reinvent the UN's gender participation, and they merged all the 3 earlier platforms and created something called UN Women. The role of Mr. Epstein in creating this organization has been glossed over. And subsequently, for a period of 8 years, Mr. Epstein, UN Women was founded in, the decision to found it happened immediately after he was released with the slightly curtailed imprisonment. And then as things, eventually a new leadership for gender justice was put in place. That leadership remained for 8 years and did not forward any further complaints from the United Nations to the US government. And so Epstein remained at large, renewing his activities for 8 years. It was only when that protective umbrella of the leadership within its tenure got over, that in 2019 he got arrested once again, and this time on federal charges, as should have been done on the first occasion. And once that happened, there was no way he could get out, and things started coming out in much greater detail. Eventually being terminated by a suicide, but still, as we have seen, there's still much more to come out, and still, even now, what the documents we are seeing are largely redacted, and they have implications on the global order, because we must contend with how much of UN General Assembly votes have been impacted by these details. this issue has just not been addressed. As an Indian, I'm a little embarrassed because there could be some ramifications for Indian participation in this cover-up. But this is, as the subject suggests, the exposure of the depravity of the elite. And that moral bankruptcy, as Professor Weiwei of China had initially mentioned, that moral bankruptcy of the entire global leadership, that is has been brought into focus by the Epstein drama, and the global implications not being mentioned. The whispered charges, or now more openly speculated charges, of his role as an intelligence asset of Israel, and the recent situation where Israel's ability to manipulate Washington is being seen by the entire world. Is good or bad for the world. The fact is that our world is fractured, and even our system is fractured. The problems are because the West and the UN, which is dominated largely by the West. Of course, now China's role in the Security Council has helped bring in an Oriental representation, and perhaps an Oriental point of view, which Professor Deepak was talking about. But the dominant conversation is still rooted in the West's understanding, possibly limited, of the dichotomies and the contradictions in the global partnership, which have not been addressed. Helga talked of the Westphalian order of the nation states, but the nation states are wherein the supremacy of the nation state is taken as given, is seriously challenged by new theological orders which have a span far beyond individual nation states. And that is what pan-Islamism is all about, various versions of it. Whether the situation in the world, which Professor Deepak mentioned, the opposing worldviews of the Orient, which is centered in positivism, and the clash of civilization suggested by Huntington. There has been a perception that at a strategic level, the Christian West, which again is something beyond the Westphalian concept, was not felt it was not prepared to take on pan-Islamism, and wanted to weaken the pan-Islamic movement by initially bringing it into a containment or a conflict which would weaken its power by sponsoring such a conflict in South Asia, which we in India have been paying for this interference of the West for the last 100 years. Fortunately, Indian leaderships have skirted, and in the old days, we would skirt it by endorsing a secular plank, In the recent days, something which has been of great, a subject of great in the last week, that the Israeli attack began immediately after the Indian Prime Minister's visit to that country. It is reasonable to infer that the Indian Prime Minister might have been taken into confidence about the events that were going to follow. And while that has led to some criticism at home as well, but it is very interesting to observe how such an engagement with Israel may have been necessary for India at this point of time to once again postpone that entrapment of a conflict between two civilizations in this region. What has happened, the way the West has finally played out, there has been a change in the American, on the board on which America has played these issues. The Iran conflagration vis-a-vis Israel has led Iran to attack 7 other Islamic nations. So we at least have evaded becoming the fall guy or the victims of sapping the rising Islamic trend. It's almost like, in the old days, history tells us of how Vlad was thrown in the way of a sweeping Ottoman movement into Europe. India and the more ancient Sanatani and Buddhist and other peacenik civilizations would not want to become fodder merely to sap the strength of one, so that it can be used, it can be weakened and then fought in Europe. These realities, which are often not stated but need to be understood, all this has happened. Today, what America is playing, it is using Islam against Islam in the 2 theaters which it has sparked off in the last 1 month, in the Middle East and also in the Pakistan-Afghanistan theater. All these fires that it is lighting. And then that brings us to the issue of why are all these fires being lit? These fires are being lit because the American nation stands overextended financially, and the nature of the depravity of the elite is primarily about a self-claimed right to consume beyond their means and beyond moral fault lines. The morality of it is what the Epstein thing brings out into the open. But there is also the fact that the American consumption rate is much higher than the value produced in America. This difference of value is the reason why in economics today we have terms like purchasing power parity. Because this is an admission of the fact that the value system is spiked. Now, coming back to how the value system is spiked, we know that the petrodollar is, of course, and is the key. These wars are as much about controlling the pricing of petrodollar And now the sparks which are being lit, which we find very worrying across the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And everybody is tremendously watchful and must be. India, Pakistan, China, and Soviet Russia, not Soviet, but Russia, all three which surround this theater are impacted and must be watchful not to allow this to spread.
Mr. Verma, could you please summarize?
Very well, very well. Because this is essentially about threatening us and our economies. The biggest challenge for us is that we have been cornered into a situation where we are not producing our own energy requirement, we are importing it. Thereby, our value is being bled. We have the energy resources, the hydrocarbon resources, but through manipulation, and corruption is the biggest manipulation that the United States has used as a weapon. The CIA has weaponized it worldwide. And there is another fact which came up, which I would like to address, is about how this is actually a war. It is a war, but President Trump chooses to call it, I think he calls it a combat, right? That is what he calls it. That is primarily because, but therein lies another contradiction. That if it is not a war, then he is not authorized by, in American law, to authorize a political assassination, something which was underlined by the Frank Church Committee. Now, so that is again grounds of where the president has violated. Perhaps he is hiding behind the fact that the Israelis did the assassination and not him. So that is another part of the new American playbook. Get somebody else to do individual acts while you achieve your own agendas. Thank you for now, and hopefully we can evaluate some of these issues in greater detail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll just say we appreciate what your remarks are. We do want the speakers to try to limit their statements a bit. We do have a speaker from Uganda. His name is Timothy Nimsilma. And he's on, and he's 25 years old. And Helga wanted to make sure we got him in, so if we can put him up on the screen. Oh, you can't bring him up right now. Okay, well then when we can, let me then, because I do want to make sure we continue on the continuity. Helga, if there's something that you'd like to respond to while we're waiting and trying to deal with this technically.
Well, I want to thank all the speakers who indeed have brought in quite diverse aspects, both of the problem and also the way out and the solution. But given the urgency of the present situation, I would really ask everybody to please address the fact, what I stated in the beginning, that I think we are in the middle of what could become easily World War III, and that obviously, we have to go to the dialogue of civilization and the new cultural renaissance as the way out. But that, I really think the result of this conference must be a plan of action to, what we do. And I have strongly suggested that we discuss this question of how to bring the need for a new security and development architecture to the governments, parliaments, to the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly. So if I may ask the participants to, whatever else you want to say, to also keep that in mind, that this is, in my view, an urgent need that we get out of this conference with a clear sense of mobilization to address this danger.
What we'll do, Helga, given your request, is just bring people up on the screen, because what we can do is have everybody up, have some responses, and as other people come in, or if we have a few others who will be participating as interlocutors, that would be fine. And so I believe what we have is Professors Zhang Weiwei, Beatriz Bissio, Professor Deepak, and Professor Ding Yifan, I believe, are all still with us here. And Mr. Verma is there as well. So maybe I'll ask Professor Zhang Weiwei, you have any comments at this point or respond? Excuse me? No. All right, fine. Well, then, is there anybody that would like to comment on what Helga just stated? Please raise your hand just so I can see you on the screen. Yeah, Mr.
Yeah. May I say something?
Yes. You may.
Yeah,
You may go ahead.
I think that's really important. What I can do here in Brazil, for instance, is try to get a concrete text and follow it to some of the representatives of the government that may be available as a request of the civil society of many countries.
Okay, so I believe that we now have one other person that has just joined. Is that right? Kwame Amuah from South Africa, security expert, techno-entrepreneur, and former senior advisor on nuclear affairs for the South African government. Do we have him? Okay, pardon us here. We're having a technical problem. Just trying to work out. Yes, we have him now on screen, but we're working to get the sound. Should I also ask him from here? Yes, please, if you can unmute on your side. We're having a problem from here. Yes, we're not able to hear you. Go ahead. Okay, please try again. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Yes,
My
we
name
can hear you.
is Timothy Msila, and I'm so much happy to address the people on this emergency roundtable on this great motion, which has been portrayed by the Schiller Institute. I also briefly talk about the subject and also talk about what's happening around the world. When we go to Epstein, the lessons we learned from Epstein, because Epstein was not entirely an African, and someone would wonder why people in Africa are a little bit concerned about him. But the lessons we learn him give us a clear hint about the power dynamics and how power imbalances. Can I be seen now?
Yes.
Yes, and about the power imbalances which are happening around the world. As our societies grow, we find that sometimes we favor oligarchs to run our systems. And if power is over-concentrated in the hands of the few, and they end up, the system ends up decaying, you will see what is happening, like the Epstein and also the culture delay and also the pedophile thing. So as Africans, we also learn from Epstein. And also, we should also tame our communities, and we also shouldn't favor the growth of these oligarchs, which are end up destroying our world and our societies. We should also favor the institutions. We should also strengthen our institutions to make sure that culture is respected. But also, if I'm to speak about some of the few developments which are happening in the world, for instance, the issue with Iran, for sure, we are people in Africa and people in the global south, and also as the youth from Africa, we should also unite about this subject. Because today it's the Iranians, the other time it was the Venezuelans, also the Greenlanders, and also if we keep quiet, they may also come back for us. So that's where we draw the inspiration to comment about such as subjects. The war in Iran, which has been started by the United States and Israel, may not really concern much about what we've been told about posing a potential threat of nuclear. But we see it as a war, in my mind, I see it as a war of fight for influence, fight for global resources. It's all about oil, it's about gas, it's about the influence in the Middle East, where Israel will take over the Middle East and America also asserts its hegemonic powers over the world. But we should also come together and we also fight this, and we also say that it should be diplomacy. That's why I come to Helga's words, which said that we should return to urgent diplomacy. Because when you look at fighting has never brought any good results. From here, I come from a region in Uganda, close to the Congo. And fighting has been in the Congo for over 30 years. Thanks to some of the global powers of their interests in mineral resources, they've created a cocktail of problems, supporting factions, and they end up fighting for over 30 years. But if you look at the diplomatic space vis-a-vis the fighting space, you find that diplomacy has been given little space. So fighting has closed that, and it has not worked. And the situation, which is very complicated, like the one in Congo, is so nuanced and it's multi-faced that if you want to approach it in a way of war, it will not work. And it has not worked. But the only call is to bring all the parties together and call for diplomacy. And in that same spirit, we also urge the powers, the people in the Middle East and the Gulf countries and people from the world to call for peace in Iran, and so that we could also prevent things like a nuclear Armageddon, because the war has just started, but if it's not well controlled, we might create a bubble which could induce a chain reaction of events which could end up in a nuclear Armageddon. So we call for peace and diplomacy as people from Africa, as also people from Uganda, so that our countries may be at peace and the world may be at peace. Thank you. Those are the brief comments. Yes.
Yeah, thank you also. That was Timothy Nsiima, actually, from Uganda. And we are going to now try to get from South Africa, Kwame Amuah, who we believe is now there and unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you very much
Very good.
for the invite. And I just want to very briefly discuss in a book which I recently, got published, and that is The Descent of Man. And some of the chapters I hammer on is the descent of true leadership, the descent of dialogue, the descent of diplomacy, the descent of spirituality, and the descent of decency. And there are another 20 aspects of the descent I also touch on. But I want to talk a bit about the descent of true leadership. I think one of the major challenges we are facing now is man's inability to develop the type of leadership which understand the essence of humanity, that we are all in this universe to help in doing God's work on earth. And in doing God's work on earth manifests itself in different areas. One is peace on earth, brotherhood and sisterhood. And I believe that once we appreciate, man begin to appreciate through our leadership, issues of war, issues of violence, and issues of indecency will all begin to go down. And I know we are talking about diplomacy. Diplomacy, it's instead of solving problems through dialogue, we are now solving problems through brute force. And the reason people are resorting to that gets back to the descent of true leadership. And if you look at in Africa, in the Americas, and then in the Europe, look at the type of leadership we have. And there are many who will say that, in fact, the only good man in the room when it comes to global leadership, people refer to probably the Chinese president and Putin and few others. But let's go to Europe. Europe, we have leadership who are more looking at war, who are more encouraging Zelensky to fight more and not to sit at the table. So briefly on the issue of Epstein, it's also around the issue of leadership. And I talk about the issue of the descent of decency. Our body politics lacks decency, lacks dialogue. And also, what pains me mostly is to accept that God has placed us on this earth as instrument of his will, and as instrument of his will, we become the messengers of peace. And when we recognize that, and our leadership recognize that, I don't think we will have leaders who will move to the island of Jeffrey Epstein, because they know why God has placed them there. I know there are many people who have different reasons why, probably through Israel, but I don't believe that. If the moral compass is there, which underpin all leadership, I don't think our world will get into a stage where we are on the verge of another war, another world war, if it gets out of hand. So I will come back that the descent of true leadership, the descent of spirituality, the descent of decency, the descent of diplomacy, and the descent of brotherhood is what is putting the world on edge now. So I agree that diplomacy is key. But let's get back to the true cause of it. And that is our ability to develop and appointing and electing leaders who understand why we are on this earth. And I believe this is the only earth I know. And I hope many will recognize that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've just heard from South Africa, Kwame Amuah, the security expert, and former senior advisor on nuclear affairs for the South African government. And we now have with us Father Harry Bury. Father Bury has been, for 70 years, a Catholic priest. He is a well-known anti-war activist. He is located in Minnesota. And he has some remarks for us today on this matter. So, Father Bury, it's always a pleasure to see you. And you won't mind me saying, at 96 years old, you look pretty good. So, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Okay, we can hear you, but it's a little faint. Hold on. We're fixing it on this side. Don't do anything. We're fixing it on this side. Okay, go.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, it's much better now.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Most, or at least certainly many people on this planet are fearful, and rightly so, because we're on the road to Armageddon. The situation is so serious that we need to do everything we can to stop this terrible things that are happening in our world. The depravity that we experience with the behavior of the Epstein group found in the Epstein files, that depravity is beyond description. So evil, such evil behavior. And now the United States and Israel attacking Iran, who really doesn't have the ability to defend itself. And so it too makes a huge mistake by trying to fight back, by thinking that using violence is the way to get what you want. It doesn't work, as history has shown us. And when you look at what Namit LaRouche, a genius, and a person who preceded him in the 15th century, our good friend Nicholas of Cusa, both of them are geniuses. And both of them said that if you want to have peace in the world, you need to change the way you're thinking. We need to change the way we're thinking. Both believed that God has given us the intelligence, the creativity, the capability, intelligent-wise and emotional-wise, to create an environment in which violence no longer exists. Yes, we have that ability as humans. God gave it to us. And so what we need to do is change the way we think. And one of those ways is to stop believing that the way to end wrongdoing is by punishment. It doesn't work. All of the evidence that we have throughout the world is that the recidivism rate, the rate of people going back to prison after they've been in prison, is 80 to 85% all over the world.
Yes.
And we keep on doing it, and it doesn't work. And so we need to think differently. And the way to think differently is to believe that it is active nonviolence that is the answer. All the gurus in our dear world from time to come since to the early Greeks. They all said that nonviolence doesn't work. And we see that now historically. What works is active nonviolence. Active nonviolence. And the Schiller Institute and Twin Cities Nonviolent, its partner, have advocated a way of having peace nonviolently, and that is the Oasis Plan. The Oasis Peace Plan says that we will have peace through development of every nation, so that the way to have peace is for all nations to be able to equally get what they need. And that's what the plan, the Oasis Plan teaches, that if we help every nation be equal to every other nation and they're all developed, then we will have peace. So that's what the Schiller Institute and Cities Nonviolent and other groups like BRICS are seeking to do in the world. And we need people to join with us and to start to think differently, that the way to stop evil doing is not by violence, it's by nonviolence, active nonviolence. And the Oasis Peace Plan is one of the ways to do that. And we need to put it in operation right away. It's about thinking differently. Differently meaning that we don't punish people who have done wrong. Punishment doesn't work. It just causes people to figure out a different way of doing the evil. What we need to do is act positively, seek to rehabilitate people who have done wrong. And we do that by positive actions like giving them respect. And our research has indicated that there are institutions that treat people incarcerated with respect. And when they treat people with respect, the recidivism rate goes from 80% to 13.7%. So we're learning that when we treat people in a way that is aimed at rehabilitation, not through punishment, but through positive actions, by development, then people change their minds. And that's what we're working for, as Lynn LaRouche and Nicholas Cruz pointed out for us. And the Holy Father today, just recently, he said, and I quote, "Stability and peace are not achieved through mutual threats, nor through the use of weapons which sow destruction, suffering, and death, but only through reasonable, sincere, and responsible dialogue, faced with the possibility of a tragedy of immense proportions. I make a heartfelt appeal to all the parties involved to assume the moral responsibility of halting the spiral of violence before it becomes an unbridgeable chasm. May diplomacy regain its proper role, and may the well-being of people who yearn for peaceful existence based on justice be upheld. And let us continue to pray for peace." End of quote from Pope Leo. This is what Lynn LaRouche and Nicholas of Cusa introduced to us the way of thinking differently. So we no longer believe, if we listen to them, that punishment, violence is the way to end wrongdoing, to end violence. The way to end violence is through positive action, and the beginning of that is to show respect to those who have done evil, not to punish them, but to really seek to bring about rehabilitation. And so we urge all of you to join with us in this effort of implementing the Oasis Plan of peace through development, as we're doing in North Minneapolis. We're working with ex-gang members and helping them to see that it is through positive actions, active nonviolent actions, that they find happiness, meaning, fulfillment in their lives. So at the local level and at the international level, we use the same process of peace through development. And so we teach people how to read and write. That's development on the micro level. And on the macro level, it is helping every nation be equal to every other nation. And that happens through cooperation, not by competition. Competition doesn't work. It makes us enemies of each other. What we need is to help each other get all our needs met. And that's what the Oasis Plan is about, helping all nations get what they need to have fulfilling lives. So I urge you all to consider changing your mind and beginning to see that the real answer to peace is through positive action, as the Oasis Plan indicates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Barry. And despite the technical problems, I think people got the core of what you were saying. And one of the positive actions I think we should take is see if we can fix up your sound system, because that was it was a very important message. What we're going to do is we're going to bring people up on camera. But while we're doing that, Helga, there was a sort of a combined question that came in. And it referred to what actually was brought up by Namit Verma concerning Epstein in the United Nations. He talked about how Sergei Lavrov had brought up that. And the particular questioners were asking about the Henry Kissinger, Roy Cohn, some of the people that had gone after your husband, Linda LaRouche, who were sort of precursors to this UN operation and were involved with that around things like Studio 54, many things like that. I think people are trying to get an idea of what Father Barry was saying and what Dennis Kucinich earlier referred to around this idea of Iran, Epstein, and the sacrifice of children. And since you have made this call for a cultural renaissance, there's like three different people who were asking about in this realm. So I wanted to give you the chance to say something about what your view is of that matter of a cultural renaissance, and also how it relates to cleaning up this infernal satanic process that seems to be so much in the discussion.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Father Barry, for what you said. I could not full-heartedly agree more with every word you said. And I'm so absolutely happy because, you are really a Kusanian thinker and philosopher. And obviously, I think that you brought out the similarity in thinking of Nicholas of Cusa and my late husband, Linda LaRouche. is extremely important, because I think both of those thinkers and their writings are absolutely crucial to the solution to this world crisis. Linda LaRouche, because he has not only analyzed the inherent flaws of this present financial system since the beginning of the 50s and provided solutions for it, but he absolutely has put his finger on almost every aspect of what has been inherently the problem in thinking and how to correct it. And Nicolaus of Cusa, likewise, he provided the idea that you can only have peace in the macrocosm if you develop all microcosms, and if all microcosms take it as their inherent self-interest to develop the other microcosms. And I'm absolutely certain that the only way how the human species will make it is if we as nations and civilizations learn to respect and love the other one and take it as our self-interest to do the maximum best for the other one and vice versa. And you have expressed this in the most loving and most dramatic way. So I want to thank you with the depths of my heart. I think that the situation on the world, we have, once the Epstein scandal, which really erupted big time after we had the January 12th and the declaration of that event, we started to look at it, and it was very, very clear to many people we are working with and are cooperating on that, if you ask yourself, how could it be that the world comes to the point of almost annihilation, and we have a regional war raging as we are speaking here, which threatens to become a global war if we don't change the direction? How could we come to this point? How can we be so absolutely insane to risk the very existence of our species? Now, obviously, there is this detachment of what motivates the establishments and the self-interest of the people, which has been referred to by Zhang, Weiwei, and others. And that can only be explained by the fact that the principle of might makes right, that you can do whatever you can impose by pure power on those who are weaker of you, has taken ground for at least many governments of the world, not all of them obviously, but many, and that has led over a period of time to deprivation and the detachment of these elites from reality. Because how in your right mind can you think about winning a tactical nuclear war? How can you think about defeating global nuclear powers who have nuclear weapons 10 times the amount necessary to annihilate all of civilization? I mean, we have to have a rethinking. We need urgently to have a strategic debate. Are nuclear weapons to be used? I mean, there was an agreement, nuclear weapons must never be used because they do annihilate civilization. Nevertheless, we are on the verge of nuclear war. In Germany, for example, because of a tendency to suppress any view which is not the official NATO narrative, has led to a situation where people are no longer discussing what is the self-interest of our country or the world at large. And I think we have to use this forum today and in the days to come to really reinstate a debate, what is needed so that we can take care of the durable survivability of the human species. And, I can only appeal to people that we really focus on that, because I think what Father Burry said is, we have to have a change in thinking. And, the Oasis Plan would be the alternative to the present raging war in the Middle East. I mean, what will be the result of what's going on? If this is not stopped, The danger is a balkanization of the entire region. You could have a torn apart Iran, a country which is 4 times as big as Iraq. What would happen? Chaos. You would have new terrorism, new refugee waves. Likewise, if the countries which are already destroyed from the previous interventions, Afghanistan is threatened with extinction. I mean, the humanitarian crisis was never overcome because the sanction regime prevented economic development. You have now a declared war between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, we are sitting on a powder keg of utmost destruction, and we have to mobilize the world population to reverse this, change the mindset, implement the Oasis Plan now, development for the entire region from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf state. Why can the governments of the region not get together and say, better than to have the resort for the filthily rich, why don't we green the deserts? China has said they have the technology to do that. There could be a living condition for everybody. And I think that's the direction we have to take. And that's why Father Burry is so absolutely right. We have to fight for the Oasis Plan now, because we have to establish a higher level of reason than the present this debate and politics of the present situation.
Thank you very much, Helga. And we are now going to bring people up on screen that we have with us and just proceed to ask and see if there are some responses, both to what you just said and if there are other matters that people, having addressed that initially, also want to go through. I'm going to ask Professor Deepak, is there anything that you'd like to say at this point?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with again pointing like how to resolve this crisis, but I think it is extremely difficult to reach certain consensus. But nonetheless, the approaches which were highlighted by some of the panelists, I would like to reinforce. One, of course, is building inclusive global governance, as LaRouche also pointed out in that video clip, that these institutions of global governance, including financials, Bretton Woods, so they don't represent most of the countries around the world. So therefore, I think we need to encourage recognition of diverse cultural perspectives in international institutions, which is not happening at this point in time. I think when different civilizations feel respected, or culture feel respected and represented, global cooperation would become stronger and more stable. So that is one point. And another, of course, I think we have to think about some alternative approaches to conflict resolution. So where I think communities, civil society, then people-oriented approaches, they need to be explored, because I do believe that many of the civilizations, they possess traditional value systems and traditions of dialogue, mediation, harmony, so on and so forth. So I think these things perhaps need to be reiterated. For example, tradition of nonviolent methods of addressing disputes between nations and communities could be, one example. And third, I think I would also focus on strengthening shared human values, because I think all the cultures, so they have these universal human values. They need to be perhaps reiterated, re-emphasized, and talked about in various platforms, especially the universal ethical principles, such as respect for human dignity, justice, and coexistence. And then we have these in different, civilization. In fact, all the cultures across the spectrum, so they have these. And if we emphasize these common values, perhaps it would be, helpful in building a moral foundation, which is also, one of the talking point in today's interventions. And these moral foundations, so they are extremely instrumental and helpful for peaceful international relations. And I think at this point in time, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me go to Professor Beatriz Bissio now for your response to what Helga and others have said.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm sure that Helga has analysis of how we came to this situation, and it's hard to answer how we get out of the situation. But the most of the governments all over the region, in particular in West Asia or the Middle East, as the colonizers call it, are not really representative of the aims of their people. So therefore, I think that we should think on what we have already discussed in other meetings: the power of the people, of the people mobilization, of internationalism in the sense of putting the main targets we have as a civil society very clearly, and to mobilize all over the world to try to have a massive support for these targets. Analyzing ethical and correct government and transparency, solidarity, development of the humankind. So I think mobilization is the key. And of course, I agree completely that we are demanding peaceful mobilizations. Yeah, that's the question, not to answer to the weapons with the weapons, because that's the way we are going to annihilation of our humankind. And therefore, I will be willing, as I already mentioned, and we have discussed this, to contribute to this idea of trying to create a network of internationalism, solidarity, and the big demand for diplomacy and against war. I think that's my perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll just indicate to people that although Congressman Kucinich was not able, former Congressman Kucinich was not able to stay on, he just wanted people to understand that he was actively in touch with people who are now in the Congress today, as in this moment, who are discussing the War Powers Act there. His point, again, he wanted to just have reemphasized, because he couldn't stay on, is that the higher culture that the American Revolution was a product of has to become the basis for a reversal of a slide toward thermonuclear war. And he referenced again that in his own piece, he had referred to one poem, which is a famous poem by William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming. You know, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passionate intensity. He said what we have to do is reverse that. You have to have good people who take to the streets. So I just thought I would say that because he wanted that conveyed. If Mr. Amuah, are you, if you're there, you have anything you'd like to say, and then I'll go to Mr. Verma. Yes, we're seeing you. We're not hearing anything. Okay, well, we'll come back to him, I guess, if we can get him. So, Mr. Verma.
And I'm posting that bite of Lavrov on the link to that here for themselves directly, because he's very unambiguous. The United States has been blackmailing diplomats, and he actually quotes the content of the blackmail. So rather than my putting it forward, I'm posting the link to that. One moment. And there. So that, because that's key. That is how the UN has been undermined. And the UN, as we know, and as we're seeing, has been undermined on many fronts, including the financial commitments and things. And the UN and its sister associations of the time, from the time of its formation, because at some level, the global participation at Bretton Woods was also parallel to the formation of the UN. And that global bonhomie was misused, first to implement a regime of a reserve currency outside the global organization, and then to manipulate it at will. So the dollar promised to remain at a fixed parity to maintain a fixed parity with the SDR, and then and also with gold. But eventually in 71, it betrayed the gold standard. And since then, we've seen the mess the world is in. And recently, there has been another issue, another confession from Europe, which is very significant. I'll find and post that link as well, which is Friedrich Merz, after his return from China, he is exhorting his people at home that the 4-day week is inadequate, and how his China visit has educated him that to have sustainable growth at home, what they're doing is not enough. The people of Europe need to understand that they need to work harder. Great that this self-realization is setting in. What goes unadmitted is that for all these years, they have been feeding off a corrupt system, which has enabled them to live off the value created elsewhere. This is what the Western Alliance has done, and which again, as another participant of that alliance, Mark Carney, recently admitted at Davos, when he said it was that they knew that the rules-based order was a sham, but they went along with it. He doesn't say it in exactly these words, but he implies as long as they were beneficiaries of that sham valuation. And then he actually says it in as many words, that once people inside the association are also deprived of the proceeds of this extortion, because the US has now closed out Canada and Europe from being beneficiaries of the loot sponsored by the petrodollar. So then they start falling out, which Carney admits in as many words. That is the reality of the Western world today. And the fact that the rest of the world, the so-called third world, has put in all the human effort to carry the Western world on its back. This continuation of colonialism and imperialism is what is finally cracking with empowerment. The Epstein angle is also about crushing empowerment and class. All these things have to be, it has the empowerment to be all persuasive, must challenge these tendencies at every stage. And the fact that when these tendencies, when people know that that there is a guilt factor involved, and not only do they implement, they seduce, and then they use that guilt to blackmail politicians worldwide to achieve General Assembly resolutions to their liking, as Lavrov points out. Now, this is how the world has been undermined and exploited. And Mr. Epstein had a great, perhaps, I won't say great, but perhaps he definitely had some role to play in suborning free choice, basically the individual corruption of the representative of sovereign nations is how the global order has worked. And therefore, this brings us to another issue, that individual corruption of all who are plenipotentiaries and otherwise significant representatives of participating nations is today a tool which the CIA is a master of. It talks every limitation it sets in law is what it violates. So while the West talks of sanctions against criminal monies, the West remains the single largest proponent of corruption and tainted money, and of using it to solve their own financial crisis. In every third world country, India included, we see a significant number of the permanent bureaucracy receiving favors from the United States for their family in terms of education, and billions of dollars being of bribe money going across, escaping the liability in terms of money laundering acts, and this being facilitated by the CIA. It has become very necessary to go back to the investigations of the Church and Pike committees in the United States, because this is not what the United States of the Founding Fathers was about. As you brought up the issue of Henry Kissinger's reinvention of the United States. It is thereafter that the United States has become entirely divorced from the original ideas of the Founding Fathers. And it is thereafter that its commitment to the US dollar and God we trust is no longer there. It is now a construct. The US dollar is a construct of arbitrary valuation. Power flows from the value of the gun, and that too a bluff gun.
Yeah, we're
okay, you're running
again. But the reason is we have to. At this point, we are converging on the limitations of time. And thank you for that. We're going to use that as your concluding statement, because we're going to go to others now for concluding statements. Mr. Amuah, are you there, and can we hear you? We seem to see you, but I don't see if we... Okay, we should be hearing you. No? It says on our side we should be hearing you, but we're not. All right, so then let's move from him. Let's go again to Professor Deepak. The final words.
No, not really. I think I have said whatever I had to say. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure, listening to all the panelists. Learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. Professor Bissio.
Yeah, well, I also have already said what I have to say. Of course, I am aware of the importance of denouncing the Epstein files and to try to see each of the governors, of the leaders who are involved, to pay for their involvement and in bringing us to this situation. And it was a great pleasure again to be here. And I would like to congratulate in person Helga and the AIR Institute and Schiller Institute for this initiative, which is absolutely urgent in this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Father Burry, let's try and see if we can have you say a few things. Any final remarks?
Can you hear me?
A little bit louder. Hold on. Okay, go ahead again.
I'd like to close by giving you one example of changing one's mind, as Namit LaRouche and Nicholas of Course urged us to do if you want to have peace. And the change of mind that I'm suggesting is that we not use violence even in self-defense. And when I was 10 years old, I came home crying, and my grandpa said, what's the matter? And I said, so-and-so hit me. And he said, be a man. Go back and hit him back and stop your crying. And so I went back, and what I learned was, but when I went back, the result was I got a broken jaw. And I'm suggesting that that's what's happening to the Ukraine. Russia's being a bully and picking on them, and their fighting back is not helpful. It's just as bad to kill in self-defense. In the same way, I would say with Iran, not to fight back to these bullies, the United States and Israel. That the thing to do is we've said is use active non-violence. That is to resist, but not violently, not to hurt anybody. And what is really sorrowful for me is that Ukraine and people in Iran are using violence to fight back, and they're getting their jaws broken with no positive result. So let's rethink. Stop thinking that the best way to end violence is by using violence, but rather by being actively nonviolent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, I think it might be interesting for many people to think about their childhood experiences and their relationship to violence. Helga, I think I got everybody. So I think you're now the final word.
Well, I think a lot of interesting initiatives have been mentioned, and we will try in the aftermath of this discussion to try to formulate them into a coherent proposal for all the participants to then hopefully carry on. One of them, Namit Verma mentioned the need to propose something like the Church Commission, which I think is a very important idea, and we will bring it to the attention of Mr. Kucinich and others who to work on that. I would really like to reiterate this idea of a new security and development architecture, because I know that that is an idea which for many people looks like difficult to implement. But if we combine it with the idea that we need a world movement of world citizens, because if the governments fail, if the establishments turn out to be too corrupt to address the urgent self-interest of humanity as a whole, then our response was that we need an international movement of citizens in every country who, while they can be patriots, also in the spirit of Friedrich Schiller, who argued that there must be not a contradiction between being a patriot and a world citizen, that we at this point need an international movement of people who say we take the interest of the one humanity first as world citizens, and only after that define whatever national interest we may have. Because I think that the change in thinking Father Burry is calling for so urgently must be exactly that paradigm shift, that we no longer think in terms of chauvinist interest or geopolitical interest, where one nation or a group of nations says we have the right to move against the other ones, because that geopolitical thinking was what led to 2 world wars in the 20th century. And if we don't overcome it, we may very well be very far ahead into the 3rd World War without return. So I would urge people to start thinking, what does it require to think about the one humanity first? How do we want to live in 100 years? Do we still think we can have regional wars or whatever? Obviously not. In the age of thermonuclear weapons, we have to ban the idea of war as a conflict resolution method. And we have to start thinking in terms of the coincidence of opposite of Nicolaus of Cruz, that there's always a higher level, that of the one humanity, which gives you the solution of how to resolve conflict on the lower level of seeming ethnic, historic, or whatever conflicts. So I would really say, please let us really think of how to arrive at this new paradigm. And I think what is absolutely necessary for that is that we know about all aspects of the one human species. That is, we have to study all cultures and civilizations and then have a dialogue, because I'm absolutely certain, because I've experienced it myself, that once you know the beauty of the other culture, their poetry, their philosophy, their paintings, their architecture, and then you present what you have produced with your culture, it is that kind of a dialogue which uplifts people to think about the one humanity. And that is what is the most urgent task. So let's really build this world movement of world citizens, because I think nothing else will solve the problem.
Thank you very much, Helga. And I want to thank now all of the panelists that were with us today. Professor Ding Yifan from China, Kwame Amuah from South Africa, Professor B.R. Deepak from India, Namit Verma from India, Professor Beatriz Bissio from Brazil, Professor Zhang Weiwei from China, former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, and of course, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. This concludes our panel 1 of our emergency conference, Epstein and the Bottomless Depravity of the Elites. And there will be a second panel that will begin at 11 a.m. Mankind is the Creative Species is the name of that panel. And so we'll see you here shortly.